So hi everyone, my name is Shivam Bohra. Welcome to Learn Comparative Programming with CodeChef. So if you are interested in comparative programming and want to learn and master data structures and algorithms, then this is a one-stop destination for you. Here we post weekly problem explanations, conceptual videos on various programming paradigms, and also conduct live problem-solving sessions. So before we actually get started, here's the reminder for you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already yet. So in this video, we are going to start with functions. So let's get started. So basically we have two types of functions. The first one is called as the predefined function and the second one is called as the user defined functions, right? So we have already used some predefined functions in our previous videos like cin and cout, and we have also used some string functions like length, at, substr, right? Now to use cin and cout, we have to include this header file called as iostream, and similarly to use these string functions, we have to include this header file called as string, right? So we are only using these functions in our program. We are not defining them, right? In user-defined functions, we are manually creating the functions by ourselves, right? We are also defining them and using them at the same time, right? So user-defined functions are created inside the program. They are also defined inside the program and they are also used inside the program, right? So in this video, we are going to see how user-defined functions are actually made and used, right? So here we have two variables, a and b. Both are of integer type, right? Now 10 is stored in a and 30 is stored in b, right? After this, we are writing cout or print statement in which we are simply printing the sum of a and b, right? The sum of a and b. Now this sum is a function that is supposed to give us the sum of a and b, or the sum of two numbers, right? Now if this sum was a predefined function, then in that case, this program would have run smoothly. So if I run this program, then my answer should have been 40. But in this case, it is saying that this sum was not declared in this scope, right? This sum is not declared, or rather it is not defined in our program, right? So we need to manually create this function sum, or we manually need to define this function sum. So firstly, we can see that this function sum is going to give us the sum of a and b, right? Now a is an integer, b is also an integer, so the sum is also going to be an integer, right? So this sum is going to give us an integer type value, or it is going to return the integer type value, right? So what I'll do is I'll write int, because this sum is going to return an int type value, so I'll write int, then sum, because it is the function's name, then round braces, and here we can see that this a is an integer type variable, so I'll write int a, comma, then this b is also an integer type variable, so I'll write int b, and after this I'll write curly braces open and enter, then it will automatically close this curly braces, and this is where I'll define my sum function, right? So what I will do is I'll write return a plus b, right? So what this will do is it will take two integer type numbers a and b, and it will simply give us the sum of these two numbers, right? So now if I run this program, then my answer is 40, right? And even if I change the name of these variables, if I, let's say, write x and y here, and I say return x plus y, then also it will give us the same output, right? It will again give us 40. So this is called as the function definition, and this is called as the function calling, right? Now let's say our function sum is not returning any value, right? Now in this case, we are returning x plus y, but let's say if our function is not returning any value, right? It is not returning any value. We are only calculating the sum. Int a equals to x plus y. Let's say our function does not return any value. In that case, the return type of this function would be void, right? Because we are not seeing any return statement which is inside this function, right? If the function does not have any return type, then in that case, we have to write void over here, right? So here in this example, here we can see that this function fun does not have any return type, right? We are not returning anything inside this function. Hence, its return type is void, right? Now in this example, here we can see that initially the value of a is 10. Then I'm calling this function a or this function fun, right? So what will happen is a will be passed on to this function. After this, I change the value of this a to 20. I change the value of a to 20, right? So now if I print this a, let's see what happens. If I print this a, run this program, then the value of a that is printed is 10. But when we call this function, we change it to 20, right? But what actually happens is any changes that we made to this a inside this function would not affect the original a that is there in the main function, right? Any changes that we made to this a inside this function would not affect to this a that is there in this main function, right? This is because this a is the original a that we have, or the original variable that we have right here, right? But this a is only a copy of this a. It is only storing a value of a. It is not the original variable. It is only storing a copy of that variable, right? So this is not the original variable. Hence, this a is called as a formal argument or a formal parameter, and this a over here is called as the actual argument or an actual parameter, right? And also, if let's say there are many functions in our program, then in that case, the main function would be executed first, right? If we have many functions in our program, then the main function would be executed first. So now we can see that this main function has a return type called int, right? And we are returning 0 in this case. We can also see that we are calling this function fun inside this main function, right? We are calling this function fun inside this main function. But at the same time, the question is, where is this main function being called? It has to be called somewhere, right? So where is this main function being called? The answer is, it is called by the operating system. This main function is called by the operating system. And this value 0 is returned to the operating system, right? Now, the reason why we return 0 at the end of this main function is because the operating system interprets the 0 value as that the program has no errors, while it interprets a non-zero value as that the program has some errors, right? Now, even if we remove this line, this main function will return a random value. It may be 0 or it may not be 0, right? So if I remove the return statement from this main function, then the program would still get executed, right? So now let's understand, why do we write this return statement at the end of this main function? Why don't we write it at the beginning or somewhere in the middle, right? So coming back to the previous example, here we can see that I have modified the sum function a little bit. I have added this cout first before this return statement, and I have added this cout second after this return statement, right? So now if I run this program, then what will happen is, firstly, the main is called by the operating system. Then these 4 lines would be executed. Then before printing this cout or before printing this sum, we first need to execute this sum, or we first need to calculate this sum, right? So firstly, I'll go inside this sum function. Firstly, I'll print this cout first, right? I'll print this first. Then I'll return the sum of x and y. I'll return the sum. and then I won't even consider this line. I'll directly return this x plus 5 and I'll directly jump onto this line, right? So if I run this program, then my output is first and then 40, right? So first this line is executed, then we returned and we ignored this part, right? So all the statements that are written after this return statement, right, are not executed. Similarly, if I write this return 0 at the very beginning of this main function, right, then all these statements would not be executed. So if I run this program, then there would be no output. So there is no output over here, right? So we have seen that in this function, we have two arguments, right? And in this function fun, we have a single argument. Similarly, in main, we have no arguments, right? So a function can have no arguments or it can have arguments, right? So this arguments is an optional part. So in this case, here we can see that this function fun has no arguments, right? This function fun has no arguments. So we are simply calling this function fun inside our main function. So if I run this program, then it would simply print this message that this function has no arguments, or function with no arguments or no parameters, right? Now in this example, here we can see that I have written the function definition below the main function, right? So now if I run this program, then I'll get an error that my function was not declared. It was not declared in this scope, right? So to use this function definition or to use this function, I first need to declare it above the main function, right? So to declare it, what I'll do is, firstly, I'll write the return type of this function. So the return type of sum is int. Then the name of this function is sum. Then round brackets. Then the data type of the first parameter, which is int, comma, data type of the second parameter, which is again int, right? And after this, I'll write a semicolon, right? So this is called as the function declaration, right? This is called as the function declaration, right? So to use this function definition, first I need to declare it. So now if I run this program, then my program would work just fine, right? And similarly, we can also write int x, int y, instead of writing just int comma int, right? We can also use it this way, right? This would also work the same way. So this would also give us the same output. Now this function declaration is an optional thing, right? It is not a mandatory thing. We can also define our functions this way. In this way, we need not to declare it, right? So we can also use our functions this way. So now that you have understood the basics of programming, I recommend you to try to solve a bunch of problems on all of the topics that we have discussed till now. You'll also find a link in the description that has a list of basic problems on CodeChef. All these problems are on Online Judge, so you can easily verify whether your code is correct or not, and you can discuss your codes in the comment section below.